All right, friends and neighbors, welcome back to another networking video. This week we are going to talk about some of the big ideas associated with the dynamic host configuration protocol. And part of that is because I've done a bunch of videos on this already, and part of it is the channel's getting big, got a lot of videos out there, so I thought I'd sort of put things together in one spot. So here we go, dynamic host configuration protocol, big ideas. So this is what we're going to chat about in this video. We're really going to do almost everything with just a couple of packet captures, but we also want to remember where we come from, and that of course is RFC 2131, and before that 951, which is BootP. Now actually the ideas for DHCP go back farther than that, but remember that the RFCs are a really good resource for when you want to read about how a protocol works, some of the reasons for its existence, and then of course all of the details with regard to protocol operation and structure and everything else. Now both DHCP and BootP work as Wireshark filters, but the preference of course today is DHCP. We know that DHCP uses UDP ports 67 and 68. Now why we use system or registered ports for both the source and destination is a question for another day, but something to think about. We'll take a look at the DORA process. That's really important. That's the main four messages of DHCP, and then we'll take a peek inside an offer. And then of course there's a collection of other messages. So let's take a look at a packet capture real quick. So here are two packet captures, but the one that we're going to really pay attention to is the one on the left. The only reason the one on the right is here is because not only is it a short one, but it's also got one or two of the other messages that we're worried about. Okay, so let's just go through and we'll actually close all of this stuff, and we'll take a look at the layers of the messaging as we work through a packet. So if we grab our first one here, we can see that this is an Ethernet broadcast frame. Okay, and then it's got this weird IP addressing. So here is our layer 2 addressing, right, unicast to broadcast, and then here's our layer 3 addressing, and we'll change our window size here. So here is the source address and the destination address. Okay, so if you watch the layer 2 and the layer 3 addressing video I just put out, you know why we've got this broadcast here and then also this broadcast at layer 2. But this one's weird, right? All zeros in a host source address at layer 3. That's very, very unusual, but it's what DHCP uses because when you think about it for a sec, remember that we're trying to get an IP address and we've got to communicate with an IP-based server on an IP-based network, but we don't have an IP address, so how do we ask for an IP address? Well, and the answer is that we use this reserved sort of all zeros IP address. This is not to be confused with your default gateway lines. So let's close all that and we move up to layer 4, and there's our source and destination ports 68 and 67, and then we move on to our DHCP. Now we can see that we've got these sort of requests here. Now let's focus actually starting on packet 4 here, because this is very standard, right? Discover, offer, request, and acknowledgement. DORA, those are our big 4 messages. Now there are other messages. There's the negative acknowledgement, we've got an inform, and then over here we've got a release, which is of course what you would do when you're actually getting rid of an IP address. This is pretty straightforward, right? I'm going to have all of my fields empty. I'm hoping to have somebody fill them in, and that's really why I want to take a quick look at an offer today. When you get an offer message, this is from the DHCP server saying, hey, I see you want to be part of the network, here are all the network parameters, and by the way, here's an IP address that I'm offering you. But we have to remember that we always say, well, how did I get my IP address? Oh, I got it from DHCP. What's DHCP for? Oh, well, it gives out IP addresses. But there is a lot more to DHCP than just getting an IP address. We can see we've got lots and lots of other fields and DHCP options. So at a minimum, you're going to get an IP address, a mask, a default gateway, and then probably DNS. But you can get all kinds of things that are related to the servers that might be on the network as well. TFTP servers, call servers, all of that stuff. There are dozens and dozens of available options here. Now, another important part of an offer is that you are told how long you're allowed to have a particular IP address for. So at the end of this period, you're supposed to give up your IP address or ask for it again. And then we can see some of the other options here. So an offer is really, really critical, and certainly not just about IP addresses. Now, an interesting question, it would be, why would I get a negative acknowledgement here? And if we take a look at this original request from the client, what the client is saying is that, hey, I'd like this IP address. And the server says, yeah, you're not getting that. So what we see in the actual offer is an IP address that's completely different from that. So a lot of times a client, if it was connected to another network or was moved over, or the IP address came up for renewal, a client will do what's called hinting. It'll say, well, look, I had this IP address before. Can I have it again? Sometimes it's available, sometimes it's not. If we're doing reservations, certainly the IP address would be available for the client again. But a lot of times, if we're just talking about a free pool of addresses, the address might be taken up by somebody else. Or if you, and that's especially true if you exited a network, right? If you were shut down or your link went down and then you came back up, somebody else may have grabbed the IP address. One of the other things I wanted to point out today is that there's a difference in the conversations that we have when we're dealing with DHCP. So these are state diagrams, or well, they're conversation flow diagrams from the RFC, and this shows you the difference between an initial connection between a client and server, and then, well, I've already had an IP address, here's how the conversation is different. So we can see the discover, the offer, the request, and the acknowledgement here, and then eventually the release in what we call a graceful shutdown. Now the release is very nice because what we're telling the server is, look, I'm done with this, you can now give it to somebody else. If the client just disappears and the lease time was in hours or days, then the IP address would not be free until that lease time was up. Here is the case where, as you can see from the text at the bottom, the timeline diagram of messages exchanged between DHCP client and servers when using a previously allocated IP address. And in that case, what we'll see is that the client will often request a particular IP address, and that'll either result in an ACK or a NACK, depending on whether or not the address was available. So immediately we go through a request for a particular IP address. Now the nice thing is that you don't have to do all these other messages if the IP address is available. It's just, sure, you can have it again. Now I thought I would close out today by mentioning something that's a little bit of RFC fun. When you read these documents, RFC 2131 and 951 date from a previous era in communication, right? A lot of these come from the 1980s, the 1990s. We'll take a quick look at that here. So here is RFC 980 or 951. This is the Bootstrap Protocol, the precursor to DHCP. And we can see that it's, IP, UDP, Bootstrap Protocol for a diskless station. Okay, but look here, 1985. And then we look at the updated one. Now we've gone through a couple of iterations at this point, obsoleting, and we finally get to the version that we're using today, 1997. So decades old. Now at the time, we have to remember that there are lots and lots of different kinds of systems, lots and lots of different protocol stacks, lots and lots of different manufacturers, programmers, and endpoints, all kinds of variation in the collection of network animals that might be out there. So there's this fun little thing in the RFC. So let's just read through this real quick. In the case of a client using DHCP for initial configuration, makes sense, that's what we're doing, before the client's TCP software has been completely configured. All right, so that's a sort of a gray area. DHCP requires creative use of the client's TCP IP software and liberal interpretation of RFC 1122. Now 1122 is the TCP IP model, 1122 and 1123. TCP IP software should accept and forward to the IP layer any IP packets delivered to the client's hardware address, so MAC address. So what it's saying here is that hey, if I send you anything to your MAC address, go ahead and process it. Well, of course, we don't know if we really want to do that. We might look at it, but we don't know if we want to process it. But we're talking about passing something up to the IP layer just because you got a frame with that particular MAC address in it, or your MAC address in it. So it turns out that lots of clients cannot accept unicast datagrams. And so there's this mystical, magical workaround in there called the broadcast flag. So we'll take a quick look at that. So we're back on our packets. Let's take a quick look at some of the flags field. So right here is the flags field. That's what we're actually talking about. And we can see that this one has the broadcast flag set. But now, at first glance, it seems pretty straightforward, right? It's either a broadcast message or it's not a broadcast message. But if we consider that we're talking about older gear and whether or not we want to accept something not at the this IP layer here, but rather, hey, if I send you something to your MAC address, go ahead and process it, which is different behavior than we have when we're using broadcast frames. All right, so close all this up again, and we're looking at this broadcast flag. So we can see that the broadcast flag is set in most of these, right? But if we pop over here to another capture, and we open up our broadcast flag, we can see that the flag is not always set to broadcast. I should also say that almost always in DHCP today, we're going to be using this broadcast mechanism. So it's very common to see the broadcast flag set, because that's the way that we want to handle this. Previously, what was going on is that hosts were getting unicast directions from a server and saying, go ahead and process this, without, of course, having a fully configured IP stack. And so today we almost always use the broadcast flag. Okay, so this has been a bunch of DHCP big ideas. We talked about messages, we talked about addressing, we worked through some of the protocol stack. Because there are so many videos out on the channel, I did decide to make new playlists for all the TCP stuff and all the UDP stuff put together. And then there's also a DHCP playlist out there to catch a lot of the maybe more in-depth conversation about it. Like and subscribe if I helped. Remember that I'm also putting out some relaxing music videos that I like to put on in the background while I'm working. But that'll about do it. So whether we're talking about DHCP, broadcasting, or unicast, crazy IP addresses, DORA or non-DORA exchanges, may those DHCP packets always reach their destinations.